Murat Atesh from The Athletic has mentioned that the Jets might not be doing much big fish shopping in this week's trade deadline. Is that a mistake? Is it the right decision? We'll talk about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app right now because we have some great offers. If you use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, you'll get up to a $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Now, like I said, at the top of the episode, Murat Atesh from the Athletic just put out an article talking about primarily the top six, right? And especially with respect to how the Jets use Ehlers and some of the, let's just say, puzzling decisions and why some of these decisions might be happening. It's worth a read. There's no paywall. You just have to sign in. So I would definitely give it a read through. It's talked about some of the same things that I've brought up before, and I think it offers some really nice video footage of specific reasons as to why Ehlers and Scheifele actually have surprisingly good chemistry for a player that a lot of people says is hard to play with. Nikolai is one of those guys who's super elusive, very skilled, and almost has a spontaneity to his game that I think a lot of players would struggle to keep up with. But Scheifele is one of the few guys who can, because Mark is just that dude. Sometimes I think the idea that, Scheifele has suggested predictability is better is actually not as suited to what he can do. Because he's so good and so skilled, I think it would actually be better if he played with somebody who's a little more explosive in the way that Ehlers is. But I get it. You're trying to find the puck and make sure that you're on the same page. And it can be hard to do that with a guy like Ehlers, who's just a ball of energy and creativity all the time. But all that said, it's really hard to argue with the results. Those two together are pretty darn amazing. So, yeah, interesting food for thought. But I wanted to circle more towards something else, and that's kind of about the trade deadline stuff, which we're hearing more and more buzz around the Jets. And I got to be honest, it's not the happiest news. Winnipeg apparently is not really looking to do a lot at the trade deadline. They're not going to be swinging big. And for me, already, that's a red flag. Now, last year when they did this, they still got two pretty good players in Niederreiter and Nemesnikov. So I'm not going to say it's all doom and gloom, but I think for the Jets, right, they're apparently not super interested in giving up futures, which I just, to a point I get, right? Winnipeg's a smaller market. They have to draft and develop, and that is how they build their roster. But in a situation where the Jets already have a really deep prospect pool of futures, and guess what? They have a couple of guys who are expiring, two or three very big players in the next couple of seasons. You got to do something with those futures, because those guys are a lot more distant than your present right now, where you're having one of the best seasons ever from your Vezina favorite goalie, who's going to win his second Vezina, and a core that is already still very good. That is really just a couple of points off from first in the NHL, with games in hand, mind you, with games in hand. And so for me, not swinging at the deadline is really a big mistake. Now, if it's something that's so crazy that the Jets realistically should not be paying that price, fine. Okay, I get it. There's a point at which even I wouldn't make the deal. But guess what, right? Like the Jets, their whole goal is to win the cup. And I feel like if you're not willing to take that chance and go for it, you might as well just not bother doing, running a team, right? Don't find yourself in a situation where you have this wonderful opportunity sitting in front of you and you're afraid to take the shot because you think, this team might not be good enough. You've got to trust in some of your players. You've got to trust in your stars. And I think the Jets realistically need to take the swing because as it is right now, this team honestly needs two pieces to push it into like elite contender status. As it is, the Jets are one of those teams that feels more like a really good wild card. And that's crazy to say about a team that's at the top of the Central. But realistically, right, when you watch them against Dallas, you noticed a couple of key differences in the way that the Stars play and how the Jets play. And it's come up against other really strong teams before, right? Winnipeg has, a lack of mobility on the back end. They can be a little bit slow at forward too. And when you start to face some zone cycles that are below the goal line and stuff, the Jets get themselves in trouble, which then impacts their ability to also make breakouts and get the puck up the ice. And you also see that the top line, when Ehlers is off of it, is basically non-functional. I know that Connor, Scheifele, and Nemesnikov had a good period last night, but on Sunday, but make no mistake, the reason that line worked was probably more because Scheifele and Morrissey really went ham. And I think that is kind of this thing where you run into a misattribution of success. Jets fans have, seemingly tried to find ways to say that Ehlers isn't good enough for the first line, and I just don't get it. For me, Ehlers is one of our most creative players. He's got some, not great puck management tendencies, but honestly, join the club with this team, right? That's one of our central problems in general. But with Ehlers, because he offers so much more going forward, it's something that you're just going to have to accept. And because that line, anytime you have like Ehlers and Scheifele together, no matter who their other winger is, they massively outscore the opposition. I just don't see how you can possibly ignore that. And it's not even like it's a small differential. I think this year, when they're together, they're outscoring opponents like 21-7, which is pretty crazy, right? And to me, that's just a box score. It's not even looking at the underlying numbers, which generally are a lot more positive when Scheifele is with Ehlers than when they're apart. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be defensive lapses. You're going to see it time and time again. But if you don't have that, that's going to be a problem. And Bones is apparently dead set on not really reuniting them. We saw it in the game against Buffalo when he finally split them apart after two really strong periods. Again, I don't even know what game I'm watching versus some of these other folks who are comfortable with the switch, because from what I saw, that line was dominating. And I don't understand why, again, we're seeing this happen where those two are split off from one another. Some team's going to pick up Ehlers and find that he's an absolute genius. So that's going to suck, is all I can say. But for the Jets in the meantime, they've still got to make the most of this deadline. This is a critical juncture. They can't afford to just do some half measures because this team, quite frankly, isn't good enough to coast with just Hellebuyck and some of their star players. They've got to push further and shoot for a bigger goal because you're not going to have many opportunities like this. You don't. Watch what happened after we had that one Stanley Cup run in 17-18. You know what happened after that? 3 or 4 years of nothing. A couple of playoff appearances, some fun moments, but nothing that was particularly lasting and long-term. And that is where my frustration sets in, is because we've been through the cycle before, and I think the Jets aren't done. And if the rumors of Anthony Mantha potentially drawing interest are to be believable, then that's good. That's a step exactly in the right direction. It doesn't have to be like an absolute giant home run grand slam swing, but you know what? At least go for a really good player who can complement your top nine and make this team better than it is. I mean, the Ehlers thing, it is what it is at this point. I've wasted a lot of breath talking about it because apparently it's not changing, but at least with the other lines, you can try and improve that offensive output so that maybe some of the guys can pick up the slack where the coaching staff is going to struggle to make the right choice. So it is what it is. We'll see how it shapes up. But one player that you did just hear me mention, Josh Morrissey, I wanted to spend some time giving him his accolades because he's had maybe the best overall season of his career, which is crazy to say about a guy who had 1 billion points last year and was a Norris favorite. We'll talk about why Morrissey is even better this year and what I've noticed about his game that's really improved compared to last season's incredible performance. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. We're past the halfway point of the season, and in fact, we're in the home stretch. And you know what? The Jets are in a pretty good position. Like I just said, they're first in the Central or thereabouts when they're competing, with the Stars and a few games in hand. But no matter where the Jets are in the standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. If you consider yourself a hockey fan who loves the stats and loves tracking the league's biggest stars, well, this is your chance to put your money where your mouth is, because Sleeper tracks everything from save percentage to plus minus to goals, assists, you name it, they've got it. And if you beat their projections for a given game, whether it's more or less than what Sleeper thinks for top stars like McDavid, Crosby, Ovechkin, Ehlers, the rest, guess what? You could actually do some pretty good stuff. And best of all, if you get 8 stats categories correct for a given game, you could win 100 times your bet with Sleeper. That's 100 times your cash with 8 correct chosen categories. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. When you're signing up for Sleeper, be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are talking through some major Jets news, some discussions. Obviously, the season is still ongoing, but this week is trade deadline week, and it's a big deal for Winnipeg. But the Jets are rumored to maybe not be making as big of a swing as we'd like, and I think for a lot of reasons that's obviously disappointing to hear. But you know, despite some of my I wouldn't say negativity, but a little bit more pessimism than I was hoping for, I did want to spotlight something really cool that has happened this year. And I wanted to talk about Josh Morrissey because Morrissey, you know, he's starting to near the 600 game mark. He's been with Winnipeg for, 8 years now. And Josh continues to really excel. But this year, he's actually taken his game to another level, right? Josh has gone from being a guy last year who put up almost a point per game to just under that this season. But where Josh was cheating for offense last year and trying to create more in transition, this year, Josh is like a total 3-zone threat. The guy is a menace in all parts of the ice. And I want to spotlight a couple of things in particular that I've noticed that have changed this year compared to his previous seasons. Before we dive into that, just one really quick thing I wanted to say about something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And we're now also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you all day, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app and, as always, YouTube. Now, getting back into Josh Morrissey, obviously Josh is having a great season. He's had like what was it, like 15 points or something in his last 16 games, something pretty crazy like that. Obviously, that's pretty sick. He's had, some monster performances like he did on Sunday against the Sabres, where he basically just kind of took over the game. I think that for me was one of his most complete performances as a Jet ever. And what I've really noticed with him is how he uses his aggression, right? He used to cheat for offense last year, and he did so at the start of this year, but I feel like the way that he's back-checked and how he's applied pressure in the neutral zone as almost like a fourth forward at times has really paid off huge dividends. Take the Sabres game, for example. You notice that he would attack the neutral zone. He'd pick off pucks higher up the ice. He'd try and cut off those passing and distribution lanes, and he'd really seal off those lanes effectively with great positioning, great awareness, and just a preternatural understanding of when somebody was trying to spring a breakout. Morrissey just picked off, 5 or 6 different plays and created counters off of them. And when he's in possession with the puck, offensively, he just seemingly carves through opponents like it's nothing. This is the closest we've really seen him to what he did when he was in the junior leagues, right? When he looked like a stud number 1 defender. And for a while, I wasn't really sure if he'd ever really hit that level because, he had a lot of off-ice stuff going on with his family. On ice, I think his responsibility grew too fast for what he was prepared to handle at the time. And I think the way that the Jets coaching staff used to use him also didn't really fit what he was. They tried to make him into like a shutdown top 4 blue liner, but really Where Morrissey excels is in being one of the most creative forces on this team. And this year, he's just elevated his game to a level that I don't know that we've ever seen from him before. He's constantly setting up chances. He's making great plays. He's carving and opening up space between defenders, and he does it almost effortlessly. He'll drive to the net. He'll work below the goal line. He can work the half walls. Whatever you want from him, he really does very well. The only thing that he maybe struggles with and hasn't been as effective on is like power play distribution, which is kind of for me, whatever, right? You have other players who could fill that role. At least in the meantime, so long as Velarde is here, it's less of a problem, right? But because he offers so much at even strength, I just don't even care. Morrissey has been an absolute dominant presence this year. Defensively, I feel like he's made really good adjustments on odd man rushes, which he was good at before anyways, but now he's even more lethal and seemingly times his poke checks perfectly. In the corners, he's a constant pest against puck carriers. I just feel like his game has grown leaps and bounds over the last couple of seasons, and this year has kind of become the culmination and really the pinnacle of the Josh Morrissey experience. He's an elite franchise number one defender. He's become really an anchor that this team kind of centers around, and honestly, he might be our best overall skater this season. And I say that as somebody who loves Ehlers' creativity and all, but I think Morrissey has had even more of a tremendous impact on this team, especially with how Bones likes to use him. So Morrissey really deserves all of the accolades that he's going to get this season. I think more and more people are starting to think of him in the Norris conversation. He's not going to win the Norris, but he'll be in that conversation, and I think he absolutely deserves to be somewhere in the finalist category. He's been amazing this year. It's awesome to see him really do well, like on a personal level, because of everything that he's gone through. You know, even last year, it was just good to see him get the chance to really grow into a role and become that top performer, because, you know, we've seen him be an on-ice leader. He's very much verbally acknowledged that role, although in typical Josh Morrissey form, it's been more reserved. But there's no question that when it comes to leaders on this team and guys that you just trust implicitly, Morrissey has become one of those absolute rocks for everyone to lean on. And I'm glad that things are really working out for him. I'm glad that he's really blossomed into this role, because, you know, there was a chance a few years ago where it looked like things might not work out for him, but now he's so much happier. He seems to just be enjoying hockey, having a fun, and, you know, at the same time, he's absolutely shredding opponents. He's scoring loads of points, and he has rounded out his game to a level that you know, you don't really see with many top pairing defenders. A lot of those guys often exchange defense for offense, but with Morrissey, you don't have to. You have your cake and eat it, and he's been fantastic in all three areas of the ice. I've loved watching him work. His defensive work has been astoundingly good this year. Alongside DeMello, it is so hard to get past them. I'm just super thrilled for him, and, you know, I really hope that at some point in the next couple of seasons, he finally gets a chance to earn that Norris that he genuinely deserves. I think he's even more deserving this year than he was last year, which is crazy to say because obviously he scored more last year. But I think based on pure performance and what we're seeing out of him, this year has been the best year of Josh Morrissey's career ever. And I really hope it continues. He has been phenomenal. It's just wonderful to see one of our, most heralded prospects really hitting his stride at a critical juncture for this team. And I hope that it continues for many more years to come. His contract went from being a little bit expensive at the time that it was signed to being one of the best deals in the whole league. Defenders like him are getting paid $9-10 million on the regular these days. So yeah, if you want to talk about a contract that incredibly aged well, Morrissey might be one of the best value defender deals in the entire NHL. So kudos to the front office for somehow having a crystal ball to see that happen, because Josh has become everything that you wanted and then some. Now, of course, Josh is going to get a chance to really shine in tomorrow's, or actually this evening's game. Obviously, I'm recording this a little bit earlier, but in this game against the Kraken, Morrissey has a chance to, again, keep racking up those points and continue his strong performance. We'll talk about what lines the Jets can expect to see against Seattle in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your car and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has your back. With over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, they'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that victory. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are wrapping up some quick conversations about the Jets and about some fun stuff. And, of course, some maybe not so fun stuff with respect to the trade deadline. But, hey, it's all just speculation at this point. Still wide open for the Jets to make a couple of big acquisitions. Maybe Chevy has a big surprise in store for us later this week. That's what I'm hoping, right? He's surprised us before. I remember the Stastny trade completely coming out of left field after the Brassard deal kind of fell through. So maybe, cross your fingers, this ends up much the same way. But until then, the Jets still have some business to take care of against the Seattle Kraken. And the Kraken this year, they ain't so good, but they're not a team that you can just sleep on, especially because they have some pretty explosive talent, especially really well balanced, I would say, all up and down the lineup. This team, for how much they've struggled this year, up front, they have a lot of interesting names and players that would actually be pretty good top sixers elsewhere, right? I think if Seattle was a stronger roster this year and had, a little bit more top end talent, maybe they wouldn't be in the position that they're in. But looking up front, so far, they've got McCann, Beniers, and Eberle all together, and we've talked about Eberle being a player that I wouldn't mind the Jets targeting if he was available. I don't think he's going to move necessarily, but Eberle would be one of those names that if you're looking for a really good top nine option to potentially balance out your top couple of lines and give you some real scoring punch, he is really dangerous, really effective, and I think he'd be a great fit for the Jets. Second line, you've got Schwartz, Venberg, and Bjorkstrand, and you also know that I enjoy Venberg. He's not going to be the player that the Jets need now because Winnipeg already got their center, but had he been available earlier and the Jets were willing to maybe go a little bit cheaper for him, I could have seen an interesting fit there in terms of a solid two-way player who maybe just doesn't have the counting stats that Winnipeg would typically look for. Third line is where things get even more fun. You've got Tolvanen, Gord, and Cartier. I really like Gord, and I thought he would have been a great fit for the Jets. I don't know that he's really available necessarily, especially because he has like a modified move clause from what I recall. But Gord, very fun player, very explosive, an absolute pest down low, and I think he would have become a fan favorite for the Jets, especially with him also having another year on his deal. That would be really convenient. Fourth line, you've got Tatar, Yamamoto, and Tanev. Of course, our old friend Brandon, still doing it, still putting up pretty good numbers. Tatar is one of those interesting ones because I don't know how much time he has left with the Kraken. He is one of the most likely trade candidates if you're looking at that team. I could definitely see him, becoming a guy that the Jets would want to lean on as like a depth option on your third line. I think Tatar is maybe a little bit better than that. Somebody who could maybe offer a little bit more, but in terms of where I actually see him slotting in, probably in the third line, and maybe he'd push Appleton further down the lineup. I don't know. Bones really loves Mason, so any sort of roster pushing or lineup changes, I am probably barking up the wrong tree for that. But overall, right, I see these lines and I see a team that the Jets, I don't know if they necessarily match up super well against them. When I think about it, especially with the fact that Ehlers is likely not to go to that first line, and we're going to see Nemesnikov, Scheifele, and Connor again, I'm not 100% confident in this game. Winnipeg, when they don't have Ehlers on that first line, is just generally not as good and is less able to control play. And I know, again, that the Kraken have struggled recently, but I don't know. This game could be a bit of a trap one for me. I think Winnipeg really needs to make sure that this whole top line combo actually works. And I sort of talked about it on Twitter, and I've talked about it on a previous episode, but one of the biggest reasons that I don't like the Connor Scheifele and Nemesnikov combination is not because Nemesnikov isn't a good player. That's not really the case. The problem is that when you have Vlad up there, you then put all the focus and onus on Connor to do a lot of the transition. And that's when he starts to struggle, right? If he has to be the one doing zone entries, zone to zone transition, and space creation on his own, that tends not to really work out all that well. He gets himself into trouble, he causes turnovers, and that's when you really don't make the most of his skill set because he's not able to get into space as well as somebody like Ehlers. And Nemestikov is not really that guy either. He can definitely do it, and he's done it at times effectively, but I think on that particular line, his role changes. I don't think he's nearly as dominant in possession. He's certainly a nice complementary player, but that's just kind of it. He's more of a complementary guy and not necessarily a driver. Scheifele himself really feeds off of Ehlers' speed and space creation. With Connor and Nemesnikov, it wasn't bad. In fact, it was good against the Sabres, but I think part of that was because Morrissey then really stepped up and continued to do what he does in being that driver from the back end. So I'm not sure about this combo. We'll see. Again, I would love to be proven wrong and be shown up because having a top line that doesn't have to have Ehlers but still kills it would give you a lot more roster flexibility and also let you keep Ehlers with Monahan, which that combination looked pretty tasty too. Ehlers works well with almost anyone, so that's almost a no-brainer. But in terms of finding the most effective scoring lines, if Nemestikov, Connor, and Scheifele can somehow gel, I'm not going to complain. But I do worry that that's not going to happen, especially over the longer term. So, like I said, we'll give it some time and see what happens, but I suspect I already know the outcome. I think it's because we've seen this outcome time and time again. We've seen it happen with Appleton, with Iafallo. I think we'll see it again with Nemesnikov. And it's not necessarily their fault that they're being asked to play a role that doesn't really make sense for them. And also, it doesn't really fit what Scheifele and Connor need together, but it is what it is. I've spent a lot of time talking about it. I'm just going to have to wait and see how it pans out in tonight's game. On tomorrow's episode, we'll recap what happens and maybe talk about any potential lineup adjustments. In between, if the Jets make any trades, I'll also spend some time talking about that and probably put out, at least a little 60-second clip or so that gives you some initial trade thoughts so you have some instant reaction. But of course, we'll dive more into it as we roll through what is hopefully an eventful week for the Jets. I really hope it is, because I think if it's not and the Jets sit back and don't do a lot, that would be tremendously disappointing for a team that has all the potential in the world to become a cup contender. So we'll talk about that later on a future episode, but for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening, and of course, making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with, again, recap coverage of Winnipeg versus Seattle and more trade stuff. But like I said, that's all we have for today. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.